LGBTIQ+, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, culturally and linguistically diverse, including those of all faiths. So as we kick off today, it's my pleasure to introduce Faheen Karum, your panel host, and who our board last week, along with Lizelle Nelms, promoted to Head of International Development and Lizelle to Head of Scholarships and Mobility. Faheen joined Scope Global in 2018, moving to the City of Adelaide to become the Program Manager of S4IG. She'd spent previously more than 18 years inspiring progress and positive change in people's lives, including with BRAC and USAID in Bangladesh, in the United States and Senegal. In her new role, she oversees 5 programs across 10 countries. Take it away, Faheen.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the kind introduction. It is an honor to lead this conversation with our inspiring speakers today. The Global UN Women theme for International Women's Day 2021 is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World. This theme celebrates the tremendous efforts by women and girls around the world in shaping a more equal future. Complementary with the UN theme is this year's IWD theme, Choose to Challenge, because as we all know, from challenge comes change. I recently attended a DFAT roundtable discussion in Adelaide with Australia's Ambassador for Gender Equality, Julianne Guevara. The roundtable was extraordinary, brilliant. In the roundtable, Ambassador Guevara spoke of harnessing not only the power of women leadership, but the diversity in leadership that can collectively influence change at a systemic level. With the diversity and women leadership as key themes of today's Scope Global panel, we are very privileged to welcome 4 inspiring women leaders from diverse and different sectors from around the world. We will hear their bold ideas, their stories and strategies that they've used in advancement of gender equality and challenging the status quo. But before I introduce our panelists, I just want to talk a little bit on housekeeping notes. We would request you to keep your video on. It's great to see everyone's faces on the screen, but we will request you to get your microphone on mute. So do switch off your microphone. We will take in questions from the audience in the end of the session today. So if you have questions for the panelists, please drop them in the chat box. And now I will start with the introduction. I'm now delighted to introduce our 4 panelists for today. I'll start with Anna Joubert. Anna Joubert is the Strategic Advisor for DFAT's Vanuatu Skills Partnership and the Balance of Power Initiative. Anna is also the Political Economy Advisor for the Vanuatu Health Program and a Gender Advisor for the Regional Pacific Women Initiative. Anna brings in over 20 years of experience in international development in the Indo-Pacific region and has previously worked within DFAT and for managing contractors. Her work is focused on applied political economy approaches for locally led reform with an emphasis on development leadership, coalition building, and women's empowerment. In our panel, we also have Kira Molloy, a new Colombo Plan program participant from Western Australia. Kira has used her scholarship to make positive strides towards young women and youth empowerment. She has completed a year of computer science study at the National University of Singapore, and during her scholarship program, she was awarded the Best Undergraduate Project Award at the iAwards, represented Australia at the Asia Pacific APICTA Awards, and was awarded the Google Women Tech Makers Scholarship. Kira is now working at Atlassian and runs her own technology consulting business called Contemporary App Solutions. Also with us, we have Vizal Prak. Vizal is a participant in the Defense Corporation Scholarship Program, DCSP, and is currently undertaking a Master of Education, majoring in teaching English as a second language. Visal is an army officer in the Cambodian Department of Military Civil Affairs, specializing in designing course and test materials and teaching English to the Royal Cambodian Army. And finally, with us, we have Latika Maske Pradhan. Latika is an Australia Awards alumni. She is a strong advocate in gender equality, equity, and social inclusion, and has expertise in gender and reproductive health policies. She has more than 20 years of experience working in the international development sector with various international NGOs and bilateral agencies, including DFAT. Latika is currently an assistant representative in the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, and heads the Sexual and Reproductive Health Program in Nepal. With UNFPA, Latika has been directly engaged in emergency preparedness and response in interventions during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you all for your generous time to be with us today, and we look forward to hearing your inspiring story. I will now start with our first question to all panel members. And I'll start with you, with Anna first. Anna, the question is, how can women in every generation create more opportunities for the next? What are some ways you have pioneered change and facilitated increased gender equality in your professional life? Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Farheen, and thanks for the lovely introduction. Well, I guess for me, in my experience of supporting gender equality within the context of international development programs in the Pacific, as you outlined, and obviously not as a Pacific Islander, I think the fundamental factor in facilitating change is to develop an understanding of the under the iceberg values and drivers, belief systems, histories, and power dynamics of the local context. I think too often there's a sense that external aid projects with expatriate consultants and team members can just go into a country and do gender, rather than realising that any shifts in the power dynamics between men and women, including shifts in the way that men and women perceive themselves and their roles within that context, are inextricably linked with very deep-seated social norms and senses of identity within a very complex and localised political economy. And this is why, first and foremost, I've always ensured that any initiative that I've been involved in is led and guided by local actors from within that specific political economy in order to have that sensitivity to those deep level issues. And in my experience, without this, gender aid projects can actually sometimes do more harm than good to the cause of transformative structural change. And this is linked, I think, as well to the broader political economy of aid and geopolitics in the Pacific, and how donors, particularly in the gender space, are locally perceived, which is far from being universally positive. But with sensitivity to this, one can try and undo or at least avoid the damage that has been unintentionally wrought by some conventional aid project approaches. And doing this, I found, by primarily focusing on avoiding any sense of externally driven interference, agendas, superiority, and working with the grain of local belief systems and cultural frames. And critically, to help build understanding that one can mobilise for change within local power structures while simultaneously maintaining that adherence to the identity markers of one's culture and context. And in the Pacific, that's particularly around the core values of respect and religious faith. Linked to this, and in particular with my regard to supporting women in leadership, I found it very effective to use my role or that of a project vehicle to help promote legitimacy and value of different models of leadership, models which contest the conceptualization of leaders as the big man, dominant, directive, positional, charismatic, largely personified by males in the Pacific, and rather highlight the effectiveness and leadership legitimacy of models that many women in the Pacific, and indeed many developmentally focused men, feel more comfortable with. A more collaborative, collective action approach, often characterized by a valuing of humility, a demonstration of vulnerability alongside strength. And as a supporter, as a supportive outsider or project, I've found that one can really strategically communicate the broad-based benefits of these alternative forms of leadership, and perhaps even more importantly, legitimise these forms of leadership within women's perceptions of themselves, women who have so often had reinforced that these so-called soft skills, ways of working, preferences are unsuited to the accepted leadership space. And finally, I guess on a more personal level, I don't think that one can be an authentic empowerer of others, particularly when working in the context of supporting gender equality through external aid programs, without being prepared for the reality that shifting power dynamics and empowering others will most likely mean a yielding of power by oneself as an advisor, consultant, team leader. It very practically means ensuring that you do not take up the space where a woman colleague could grow and flourish, and actively seeking ways to maximise her visibility status, which will often mean at the cost of your own. And one way of thinking about this that I found helpful is to see my role as a campaign manager. My key objective is to promote the leadership and influence of those who have not been accustomed to the limelight through discrimination, cultural and social norms, structural dynamics of donor beneficiary aid. So yeah, just to finish, I think a fundamental personal requirement of effectiveness in this space is to make sure that we as outsider actors in the development nexus are constantly checking that our motives and attitudes are those that enable the leadership of others, and that we are well hidden in the wings, not center stage.
Right, very powerful. Thanks, Anna. It's very important that while we try to empower others, we don't have to be in the front and central, that we can be behind the scene. And that's a very important takeaway as well. Thank you, Anna. I'll now move to Kira. Kira, as a young woman professional in the technology sector, please tell us what influenced you to get into the sector and how you're taking your experience to create more opportunities for the next, linking back to the question on creating more opportunities for the next, and also, you know, your personal and professional life journey.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Farine. So I guess the way that I got into technology wasn't exactly conventional. So it was more like a strange twist of fate. I was put into a class called Creating Apps in Year 9, and at the time I remember being very annoyed because I had no interest in the subject at all. But because I had to do cooking and needlework, and I also had to do 2 languages, this was my only option. So as part of the class, we were required to create an app for a competition called the Tech Girls Movement. This was also the first year that this program had ever run. And because this was the first time that the class was taught at my school, the teachers didn't actually even know how to code. So I can remember that I really wanted to do well. So I taught myself how to code from YouTube. And my team ended up finishing our app and we became national winners. So as a part of the program, we were assigned a mentor. And my mentor was Sandy from Avanade. And she's been a huge role model for and I think it's really important that we keep on being role models for the next generation as well. So for the next phase of this competition, we were encouraged to submit our app into the global technology competition called Technovation. And my team was the first team to become semi-finalists from Australia. And we were invited to pitch at Google in Silicon Valley. So once we were at Silicon Valley, we got to experience many amazing technologies such as Google Glasses and self-driving cars and 3D printers. So this really opened my eyes to the abilities of technology, and I actually started to consider a career in technology at this point. So upon my return to WA, it was time to choose my ATAR classes. But of course, computer science and engineering sciences was only available at my brother's school. So because I went to an all-girls school, I was offered subjects like children, family and the community and food and nutrition, which of course wasn't offered at my brother's school. Nevertheless, I finished high school and started my degree in computer science. But nothing can really prepare you for that first day of computing lectures. When you walk into the room and there are about 400 students there and maybe only 10 girls. And it also wasn't uncommon for me to be the only girl in tutorials as well. So from experiencing this gender disparity firsthand, I realized that this was a significant problem. So diversity of all kinds has been proven to stimulate innovation. And as innovation is one of the key fundamentals of technology, it is so important that we continue to encourage more females to try technology in order to keep up with other countries too. Right. So now the problem is that there is a stereotype around technology. So this stereotype is that to be good at coding, you have to be a greasy older man who sits in a basement all day and eats pizza. Now, obviously, this is not at all true, but the stereotype that technology is a male subject is ingrained in girls from as young as 8 years old. So because of this, I have been trying to bring technology and coding to girls in primary schools by running coding workshops and robotics workshops. For example, I ran a robotics workshop for year 2 and 3 girls in my local, like a low socioeconomic primary school. And we taught the girls how to code robots to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star on a xylophone. And the most rewarding part about this was seeing the boys peering into the classroom and saying, wow, look at that. I wish I was in there doing that. So I guess to answer your question, by having a single female go into the technology industry, they can then have a ripple effect to encourage more young girls to try technology and attempt to change attitudes for future generations as well. And I think it's so important that we get girls into technology because according to PwC, by just changing 1% of the workforce into STEM roles would increase Australia's GDP by $57.4 billion. And if we don't start encouraging girls into technology and STEM roles, then women will be left behind and the gender gap is just going to keep increasing.
Wow, what a great story, Kira. So inspiring. And I mean, what's lovely is that how you're also taking it forward and also teaching these young girls, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, whatever, but you're a role model for the next generation. Thanks, Kira. I'll now go to Vizal. Vizal, you're coming from a very strong male-dominated sector, the military in Cambodia. I think the audience here will be very interested to hear your take on how women in every generation can create more opportunities for the next. What's your take, Vizal?
Thank you for the question. I think to answer this question, firstly, we have to understand that the current situation of women in the specific context first. So do women have enough opportunity to participate in the public and private sectors? Or if the women receive that chance, would they be able to encourage them? Or if they do not have that opportunity, so what should women do to create their own opportunities? So back to Cambodia, there is very small percentage of women who participate in both sector like private and public sectors. This is because of women face many challenges in terms of culture and stereotypes. For example, one traditional Cambodian saying that women are unable to do anything besides moving around the kitchen. So because of these stereotypes, so it limits the young women, restrict them from going to work. And I think in order to create the opportunity for women for the next generation, is women have to develop their knowledge, their soft and hard skills. As many research has been said that most of Cambodian women, especially women who live in rural areas, do not have enough opportunity to go to school or earn their degree because they have to stay home, take care of their sibling, perform household duty, or especially they have to support the head of the home. So, and secondly, I think women should be encouraged to involve in the social work because by involving in the social work, women can see like the world in different perspectives. And I think this encouragement should be come from women themselves, come from like their family, other men, or from the society. So while women participating in the public and private sectors and also in the society, I think they not only can build their knowledge, but also the experience. Because sometimes we already know that so we study may be different from work. And moreover, I think women can also like build their confidence while they step out of the comfort zone. I'm sorry. I think back to, I can say that for me as a military, I encourage myself to join the military. And back the times my parents didn't allow me to join the military because they think that it is impossible for me as a woman to join military, and they think that this role is only for men, not for women. But actually, I try not to. I disagree with this idea because I think that not all military have to go in the front line. Maybe there are some position for me as a woman in the military. And moreover, I think another thing that encouraged me to join military because when I was young, me and my friend, we talk about dream job, and I told them that I want to join military, and of them, like, they laugh at me because I'm a woman. How can you join military? And at the times, I think that what a difference between men and women. Why only men who can join military, not women? Because I think that we have the same ability, we have the same knowledge. Why women cannot join military? So to change their perspective, I joined military, and so to show them that, okay, not only men, but also women can join the military.
Great, great. Thank you, Visal. What a powerful journey, and how strong determination from your end. Thank you, Visal. I will now go to Latika. Latika, with your leadership role in UNFPA and your advocacy in gender equality and women's health, how would you respond to our panel question today?
Thank you. In terms of creating opportunity for women and really availing those opportunity is, in my own experience, what I feel is every woman and every girl needs an aspiration in their life, something to look up to and to have that ideal. And at the personal level, if I have to talk about myself, I was raised by a grandmother who was a single woman. And we had 3 women in our family, my grandmother and grandmother's mother. And I was raised by her practically. And I saw her being very outgoing, very independent woman, despite the very constraining patriarchal society that we live in Nepal, poor country, low income, middle income home. We were struggling, but in all that situation, I saw that inspiration in my grandmother in terms of, okay, nothing is impossible. So that gender difference and biasness didn't come to me at that early age. But when I grew up, I had this determination and ambition, but I was also married young. So after I got married, then only it got on to me that what actually this whole dominance, social norm and patriarchal society actually means, why we have been pulled down just for the reason of our, reproductive role in the society, why we are different. So I really had to struggle myself into really creating that opportunity for me. There are constraints at the level, individual level, socio-economic, political level at different layers. But if I have to talk about personal level, I felt that having a champion in your life is so important. And in my early days of my marriage, within the obligations that I was ingrained in with having a family and children and to continue with my studies and my career, I really give this credit to my husband to be, that support and backup that I received from him was substantial in terms of really, like wind beneath my wings, kind of, really pushing my ambitions through and making my choices. Without that flexibility, I think I will not have had that choice to grow within my aspiration and, goal in my life. So that actually really matters, to have that champion in your life, have that ideal in your life. And my grandmother and my husband were those champions. And I feel that that's why engaging men and boys are so important, to really make them understand, to create that opportunity equal for women and, with people with different gender orientation, or, with people with disabilities. So I think this understanding of equality has to be out there to be able to have those leadership grow within people as an individual, and especially women and girls. And if I have to bring it to the national context, I feel that Nepal in itself, if you look at the education, health, and other indicators, socioeconomic indicators, it's really, really poor. Still, 3 girls out of 10 are married before the age of 18. 2 girls or 3 girls out of 10, bear children before the age of 18. And 3 women are dying each day while giving childbirth, which is preventable, could be preventable. And almost 16% women do not make their own choices for contraception. So you can see how much bodily autonomy the women have. They cannot even choose and decide for themselves, even to go to the health facility and avail those services that are such basic human right. So until and unless those basic social norms are being addressed, those choices and decisions for women are being made, reaching out in that leadership role is something that we really need to work hard on. And this is where I see, for creating opportunities, there has to be champions in your lives to really make you feel grow within yourself.
Right. Thank you, Latika. You've raised a very important point here, which is the male champions in our lives, in our journey, as well as engaging men and boys. To wrap up this first question, we've got some powerful takeaways from all our panelists, and that includes dealing with the power dynamics. When we're dealing at a community level, we don't need to be front and central. We could be working behind the scene to promote and to encourage women to be in that leadership role. We are talking about breaking the stereotypes, breaking the ceiling, and then of course, male championship. Now, on this note, I'll ask different questions, but specific ones for each panelist. I'll first start with Anna Joubert. Anna, you've worked across multiple programs in Vanuatu. In one of the recent reports from the Better Balance Strategy, it states that these programs work with the support of local leadership and working within the grain of deeply held cultural and religious drivers of the local context. So, Anna, if you can tell us a little more on this with respect to gender equality and gender equity.
Thanks, Farheen. Thank you. Well, I think that really is about identifying those entry points and the framing that are really going to resonate with the individuals and the groups that you're seeking to influence. I mean, you referenced our gender equality strategy, which is very intentionally called a better balance strategy. In Vanuatu and in many Pacific Island countries, actually the word gender doesn't exist in the local language. So automatically, when people hear the phrase gender equality, this can be among, particularly in rural areas or less educated areas, an immediate preconceived connotation of foreignness and imposition. Another negative kind of pervasive attitude, or a response to gender equality is that it's women's business, that it's just something that, women are involved in, nothing to do with men or boys. Linked to that, but perhaps even more negatively, it is to do with men and boys, but it's a zero-sum game, basically, that if women win, women are empowered, men are disempowered. So our whole sort of approach of our better balance strategy was all around changing the emphasis and changing the conversation to actually reduce that alienation and to reduce that fear. I mean, in many contexts, it is a basic fear. And so, really, and I think Latika raised an excellent point around actually not just engaging men and boys as the people that you're trying to influence or target, but using those voices and those influences, particularly in patriarchal societies where it is the chief, it is the church leader, it is the male politician that carry that status. And so to have them to be framing the contestation or the contestation to the status quo in ways that resonate with the people that you're wanting to influence is very powerful. And so we're very intentionally emphasized, rather than women's empowerment, you know, it's about those broad-based benefits. I mean, we did a little video not that long ago, and, you know, it was all about women's economic empowerment, but just speaking with, you know, again, guidance of our local team who knew that particularly in rural areas, if we called it, you know, anything to do with women's empowerment straight up, we would lose the entire male audience. So, you know, we just did a little, you know, tweak of the title. It became Skilling Women, Empowering Communities. So straight away, we kept everyone. Yes, it was all about skilling women, but the result was actually everyone reaps the benefits. And you know, language is very powerful in alienating or building that buy-in. Similarly, within the Vanuatu context, where you do have, you know, as I said, 90% more Christian, really intentionally using biblical and Christian framing to actually counter other interpretations in the sense of around really emphasis on and equality and usage of talents. But again, you've got that straight, you're breaking down those barriers of some Western imposed foreign concepts. So yeah, it really is being back to that point about really analysing what are the drivers and the values that actually are going to determine people's attitudes and behaviours, and to really, in particular, I mean, this is for outsiders, you know, to know that what your assumptions are and what you think should be normal for everyone isn't necessarily the case. So yeah, it's that sensitivity to those deeper drivers within the context and framing accordingly.
Yeah. Excellent, Anna. I want to take away this point. You talked about skilling women and empowering communities.
Yeah.
And I think in the international development sector, we have skills programs, right? And we go out there, and it's not really a top-down measure. It's actually being integrated in the local context with the people, with the communities, with the church leaders, with it's still about that information that floats to the community. So empowering communities is a very powerful takeaway. And I know that in Vanuatu Skills Partnership, also across Vanuatu, local leadership has been a very important part and parcel of how the program has delivered. And that is also partly and largely with the sort of leadership concepts that you bring into the table, Anna. So kudos to you.
Just for Alec, I think that's a really important point, particularly in the area of gender equality.
Yeah.
That if it isn't locally led with people who really are part of that grain that you were talking about,
yes,
you risk so quickly from the get-go,
right,
as you know, doing that damage and that harm. You know, as an Australian, I can say that there have been lots of Australians who have come in with the red kangaroo, and we're doing gender, and you know, and it's much more those sensitive programs, which can be Australian funded, that have that real understanding that unless it's locally led, you won't get the buy-in or the resonance.
Right. And also it builds into the sustainability piece, right? When it's locally led, you're able to sustain this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anna. I will now move on to Kira. Kira, linking to your experience with the NCP, what were some significant examples of women in leadership and of women making a difference in their communities?
Yeah, sure. So before I started studying at the National University of Singapore, I wasn't sure if the gender disparity would be as bad in Singapore. But unfortunately, it wasn't much better than Australia. There were only a couple of girls in every class. So when I was awarded the Google Women Techmakers Scholarship, I saw this as like a perfect opportunity to run another coding workshop, but this time in a different country. So as part of the scholarship, all the Asia Pacific scholars were invited to a retreat, which was held at Google Sydney. So this is an amazing opportunity to hear about all of the ways that women were leading and encouraging other women into technology. It was a very inspiring few days, and each of us were encouraged to go back to our countries and run more workshops for women. So upon returning to Singapore, I got in contact with my fellow scholar and the Women in Technology at Nanyang Technological University. So it was great to make these partnerships and to also hear about the ways that women in tech at NTU have also been actively encouraging females in technology. So we had organised our full day coding workshop to be held at Google Singapore. Then of course, 2 weeks before the event, the first COVID outbreak happened in Singapore and we had to postpone the event. And then it got to the point where we couldn't postpone it any longer. I had to return to Australia due to COVID. So in order to work around this problem, we decided to hold this event virtually. It actually ended up working better. So originally we had to select girls as we couldn't monitor like too many at once. Because we were all stuck in lockdown, we decided to accept everyone that applied and ran 2 workshops across 2 days. We were able to share our experiences and knowledge in the field and also ran a coding session to give them a taste of what a computer science degree would be like. It was great to work with these women leaders in Singapore and it was very heartwarming to know that this battle is also being fought across the Asia Pacific region.
Great, Kira. Great way of pivoting your plan on doing the training for your students. Making it online, actually, this is probably the new norm of doing business. Thanks, Kira. I'll now move on to Vizal. So Vizal, we understand that Cambodian women make up less than 3% in the military, especially in the upper level. So for someone with your rich experience, how do you think we can achieve true gender equality in the workplace? And what can an organization do to champion gender equality?
Oh, sorry. Thank you for your question. I think the true gender equality mean we have to provide equality for both men and women to achieve the target. And we can say that in many workplaces, it is very rare to achieve true gender equality because of the male dominance perspective. However, we can achieve the true gender equality by considering 2 factors. So the first one, it can be achieved by understanding the structure of the organization. So this means we have to consider the number of men and women in the top position. As we might know that there are a very big gap between men and women in the workplace. For example, in 2020, only 18% of women in the globe is a top manager and 36% of women in the senior role. So this means the top manager should have the decision ability to hire employees, which is the impact of the ratio of men and women. And secondly, I think the workplace should provide the same opportunity for both men and women. So they may have the same opportunity to raise their voice, contribute their ideas, or make decisions. And also both men and women can have the same status and value. And another one is like if the men or women who have a very good ability, so they should get promoted without focusing on gender. Another question, if we talk about how can the organization champion the gender equality, I think the organization should develop their policy by supporting the policy that support both men and women. As I can give an example about the strong sexual harassment policies, it is very helpful that can promote antagonism when women are sexually harassed. And there's very example that women cannot raise their voice against the sexual harassment because of the poor policy that support them in the problematic situation. So if we can have this support by the strong managers, I think every employee can have their value and respect, and the notion of the true gender equality can be achieved. So I can give an example like in my professional setting, as teachers, I always give the same opportunity for both men and women to involve in the classroom or to provide their opinions about their study. So I think it can be one of the effective way to achieve the true gender equality.
Great, thank you so much, Vizal. It's really interesting to hear, all the practices and policies and that can be in place to make our workplace more inclusive and to allow for gender equality. Great, thank you, thanks. I'll go to Latika now. So Latika, through UNFPA, you have been in the front lines of COVID-19 crisis in Nepal. What was your experience in addressing this disproportionate burden that we talk about that women carry? And what were some of the measures that you took to counteract and mitigate that burden?
Yes, thank you. I think this is a very important question because in every emergency, there are a certain group, including women, who have special need. Women continue to give birth, women continue to require contraception, and due to the system not working in emergency, you may not be able to avail those very basic services to women. And the COVID-19 was an entirely new kind of emergency and crisis for all of us. The kind of the preparedness work that we used to do before, it entirely changed because people couldn't go in the ground. We couldn't mobilize, in person. Contact was highly restricted. There was no mobility. Countries started to panic and went into lockdown. If I have to talk about Nepal, we went into lockdown for nearly 45 days and more. And, it really impacted the way the services were delivered in the ground. And since a UNFPA mandate has been in reproductive health, in, really responding to gender-based violence, so we could see the situation has really exacerbated the impact, especially on women, because they were unable to avail the services. They couldn't go to the facility, in person. Many women who might have been, survivors of abuse or victims of abuse at their homes were confined in those lockdown period, maybe with the abusers themselves. And since people were not being able to go to health services or to access other services, there was a high risk there. So in Nepal, we did a quick rapid assessment right after this lockdown happened, and we could see a sharp decline in utilization of services. And basically the response was there was no transportation, there was mobility restrictions. So even there was an emergency and government has said that all emergency services will have to be available, but they would not consider safe abortion or family planning, contraception and emergency, right? They would not allow women to go to the facility because they don't see that person going through an emergency at that point of time. So we practically saw a large dive down in terms of utilization of services. There was fear of transmission very high in the community, as well as among the service providers, because there was very uncertainty was there in terms of how you get infected, what could be the possibility. It was even human to human kind of animosity that started to be created in the community. If someone in a community has been infected, then the whole village will kind of, we also saw those kind of circumstances in the ground. So as a response to providing this very basic life-saving services to women and girls and the people in need, we really advocated and activated the cluster approach that is a global mandate, especially for UNFPA to work in the reproductive health subcluster and GVV subcluster. So that is where we really advocated for making this reproductive health service essential and life-saving, and has to be continued in the ground, regardless of all these restrictions and mobility. Government were shutting down most of the facility. And we started, one of the things we started was to really widely, made this risk communication and community engagement widely disseminated across country, so that in the community there is an awareness besides hand washing and how to prevent. There has to be awareness around when and where to seek care, where you can go for help if you need. Those type of information was so essential. And when we kind of did this helpline was something we started that people could call a line and ask if there is a certain need. So those were the innovation we tried. And we kind of found out that in those helpline services, majority of callers were male. calling for women-related problems. So you can see, like these women may not have access to mobile even to call and seek help when they need. So there was a lot of problem that kind of showed us the disparity across women's access, but we really, widely kind of, the intervention that we really wanted to focus on was risk communication, helpline services, teleconsultation, which could give remote consultation services, even referrals were needed. And made the government make those essential services available in the hospital and facilities, where we even provided equipments and support for human resources and other PPEs for RMNCH services, which was practically diverted to COVID-19 response. So those were the intervention we actually focused on to mitigate the problem that we were facing in the ground. Thanks.
Thanks, Latika. That's actually quite interesting to hear from you, because we talk about COVID-19 and we talk about how to prepare ourselves, right? We talk about washing our hands, social distancing and whatnot. But then there are the existing issues that are already there. You're talking about women's health, reproductive health, that suddenly is not a priority. And then that has an immense impact on the women, the communities that depend on these services when that's not a priority. So thanks for sharing these really powerful experience and stories from your work. I just wanted to say that we are getting a lot of questions in our chat box, and I would request if you, from the audience, if you have specific questions for our panelists here, please put them in the chat box. So just having looked at the questions that are coming through, we have one for you, Anna, and I wanted to post that out. And after Anna, if anyone wants to respond, we're interested to hear everyone's perspective. The question is, in Anna's thoughts on how organizations champion gender equality in a sustainable way.
I'm assuming that's in an international development context?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, I think that's really a lot to do with, I guess, conceiving of development, or, again, as an outsider in that sort of development cooperation way, that really the only effective sustainable development happens when it's actually building on and catalyzing and drawing from that organic internal momentum for change and reform in the local level. Anything that comes from outside that is a sort of a project that is just imposed, that, I mean, we've all seen it. If any, it's a flash in the pan, and there's absolutely no sustainability. So I guess that gets back to any organization or initiative that's really wanting to support sustainable gender equality. It is really finding and supporting those local drivers of change within those specific political economies, because if you don't do that, you're absolutely just building on the sand. So I think that's just the number one priority. And then really to really have that focus on that coalition building, I think too, that sense that really social change happens when there is a critical mass, and that nothing, that kind of an individual project or an individual, really has very limited traction. And so that sense of seeing, I guess, firstly that, identifying that developmental local leadership, but then helping those developmental leaders and drivers of change to build those broader coalitions really maximizes the chance of sustainability. And that gets back again to Latika's point about bringing in those broader actors within society and making sure that it's not a kind of usual suspects, that gender equality, we all know who the NGOs are, or who the groups are, the women's organization, and really kind of changing that paradigm to be a much a broader movement for change.
Great, thank you, Anna. Just fielding a few more questions here. There's one for Latika. Latika, you were an Australian Awards Scholar studying gender in Melbourne. Do you think this impacted your work in Nepal? And if so, how did that experience influence your current gender-related work in Nepal?
Yes, thank you. I really I'm really, honored to have that opportunity with Australian Development Scholarship back in 2004, and got to study gender studies in the University of Melbourne. So that gave me kind of really my academic, I really could enhance my academic engagement in the area of gender, which gave me a broader outlook to how you really understand patriarchy, how you really understand gender per se, as Anna earlier pointed out. It's also about masculinity, right? It's not only about women suffering, but because you need to really understand the broader perspective of how gender works. So sometimes we get really driven by our, own personal life experiences when we work, but you really need to see that socio-political dynamics and power dynamics. It may not be the same women may not suffer the same consequences back in Rukum, in a very remote area, coming from a Dalit community, or a women from Brahman community in the Kathmandu Valley is quite different. So the intersectionality that brings into the gender dynamics was something that I could really, enhance my perspective on. And when I really employ that in my work, it certainly helps, because you certainly get to see all those different lenses and perspective when you really engage in the work. So I really appreciate that opportunity that I received, and the academic excellence that I gained from that actually really helped, because having that degree is also one thing that is visible to the people when they look at your, work and CV, but having to contribute in the process with those, understanding is a different thing altogether in terms of how you contribute. So yes, definitely it helped, and still helping. I think I'm still learning in my process, and I think learning never stops, and that has been a great experience.
Yeah. Great, very good point. Learning never starts. You stops actually. So you start your learning from the day you're born, and you keep learning. That's how we go about. We've got more questions. This one is for you, Kira. Have you noticed a change in attitude towards diversity in the technology industry?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. So I've noticed probably both positive and slightly negative change in attitude in the technology industry. So I think I've noticed in the technology industry that we're beginning to realize a need for diversity in the industry, especially in technology. If we remain stationary, the competition will be thinking of a better solution, and that you're falling behind. So for example, I work in the machine learning team at Atlassian, and before last year, we didn't have any females in the team. And since then, we've introduced more women, and our technology lead is actually a female. Another thing you actually notice is how females are so happy to support and mentor each other. So when I joined the team, one of my female engineers reached out and offered to be my buddy, and has been a huge support for me throughout my time at Atlassian. In saying this, one thing that we need to be concerned about is tokenism. So for example, when I was tutoring at uni, the computing department wanted to appear as though they had an equal gender ratio. So they wanted to recruit as many female tutors as possible. Now, the problem with this is that I would study really hard and work really hard to make sure my students understood everything. And then I'd be tutoring next to someone, another woman who'd failed the subject 4 times. So this affects the way the students saw me, as they then assume that I was only given the job because I was female. And then they started just going to male tutors and just not going anywhere near any of the female tutors. So I think there is a very thin line between encouraging women and giving them opportunities, but we also don't want it to get to the point where their colleagues think that they only got the job because they're female.
Very important. I mean, this is not about tokenistic approach, but basically being skilled for the role that you're in, right? So, and again, that's a question that women would face, but not naturally a man would face. So very good point that you've raised, Kira. I will now go to Vizal. There's a question for you. Vizal, in most countries, including Australia, the military service has higher male participants compared to female. Seeing women like you are challenging the norms and joining the service may open the path in front of other females to join in. In your classroom, what is the rate of female students compared to male? Have you seen that rate increase from since you joined?
Thank you, Maya, for the question. Yeah, I think we already understand that a lot of male who joined the military, and I can say that back to my experience while I was teaching, it was, for example, like 50 of students, it was just only 5 or 6, 5 to 7 students is the female. And since I joined the military, I saw that the number of female increased in that military. I think because of the government that provide support for like the female that encourage them to join the military.
Right. Well, that's great. When exactly, I think it circles back. If you encourage women and if you have opportunities for them to join, that's when we can see an uptake on them. Right. Thanks, Visal. Now, we do have one question from our gender advisor, Alex Kay, and I'll open it to all panelists, whoever wants to take on that question. Alex mentioned that she's interested to hear the panelists' thoughts on intersectionality that exists within women. Example, women that have a disability, and how we can ensure that we consider the intersectionality that exists within our communities in program design, delivery, and evaluation to ensure that everyone can access the opportunities available. Anna, did you want to start?
Okay. Well, I think one thing that I'm working on different DFAT projects and designs and for a long time, the real risk is there's this real kind of project mentality, and even within a project there are these kind of silos, and gender and disability is kind of the thing that we need to make sure that we tick the box for disability, or we have a section on disability. There's almost a danger of now the Jessies just kind of all rolled up. There's not actually the specificity around gender equality, disability, and those intersectionalities. But I think so much of it comes down to not thinking in that projectized way. But if you actually are thinking about, whatever aspect it is of social change, really having that broad and deep, again, getting back to that, small p political economy analysis of where are the blockers to change, where is disadvantage, where is injustice, and I mean, if you're looking at it from that way, rather than a kind of, we need to do disability in this project to meet a donor requirement, that's where things often do get siloed and completely tokenistic. Whereas if you're having again, often with local leadership and the people who are, working in those communities and living in those communities and have that experience, if you're listening to those views and incorporating those perspectives into your designs and leading your implementation, then you have a much higher chance that those realities around, for example, that example that Alex has raised, are actually front and center. We have a great example with Scope's Vanuatu Skills Partnership Program, that when we first started, that was a kind of a classic TVET program, skills, there was nothing really in that very original design that it was about disability. Now, 10 years later, it's really at the forefront of driving disability inclusion in the skills centre, but even more broadly, in service delivery. And that, has been to do about seeing the whole question of access within a society, not, we're not a disability project, so we'll leave that to some other, so just, I think, getting away from those kind of labels and yeah, as I keep saying, project modalities are never helpful for real social change.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, Anna. Latika, did you have anything to add to that?
Yes, from my experience, I wanted to add that to be able to design a program or a project on disability inclusion, or really looking at that intersectionality, you also need evidence and information, right? And I somehow feel that, especially in Nepal, it's underreported. Even in census or any surveys, we don't see the representation of people with disability to that extent, which we know that there exists. But in many families there are still social stigma. So many of the children who are who have autism or who have mental disability, we never see them outside of that family in a social gathering. So you can see that stigmatization, underreporting, it never comes out in a survey. So those population are uncounted for, right? So to be able to design a good program to really include, even in this COVID situation, to give an example, to be able to reach out with your program in an emergency, if you don't know how many actually exist within that community, it is difficult to actually program. And until and unless the system and the country actually accounts for all those people with various different disabilities, I think it is difficult to design such program. And even within disability, there are different types, right? It's also need to be inclusive of what kind of a disability that person may have and what kind of a special need that actually requires. And looking at the supply side, even the teachers or even the schools or even health service providers are not well oriented on how to address those people with special needs, giving those services. So there are constraints at various levels, not only in terms of counting this population, but also designing a program that we can make it more disability friendly. But from UNFPA side, we are working on the strategy to really mainstream disability and inclusion in our work program, including for not only to implement, but also to monitor. But that is where we continue to see challenges, because we don't have a lot of evidence and it's very difficult to manage and monitor in the ground. So we need that kind of expertise and skills to be able to incorporate, really engaging people with disability in the process is, I think, really the key and important. Because they are the one who knows and who can design that program better than the people who don't live those experiences themselves, right?
Right,
so
right.
It's important.
Good point, Latika. And I just wanted to tie this to one of our initiatives from Scope Global, which is our MAVEN program. And in MAVEN, we've got advisors who come with lived expertise and experience. And what you're talking about is that we need that lived experience and expertise to be embedded in the design, to be embedded in the program delivery and evaluation. Because if it's not coming from them, from someone else, how can we capture the gaps and how can we then address it? So thank you. Thanks for these very powerful insight. I'm conscious of time, and I know that we are running a little over time, but we've got still a lot more questions that are floating through. I will ask one more question. This would be the last one for our panel. So this is a question from a chat box. As a result of COVID-19 and moving into a new normal, where employees spend more time at home working from home, does this present as an opportunity and can change gender dynamics that may improve gender equality?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. So I'm just going to tie this into the last question as well, because I kind of missed that one. So I guess as a part of COVID-19, so for example, I'm in WA, I'm working in Sydney technically, so you can work from wherever, obviously. And I guess also along with the disabilities question, you're now at home, you're in your, so your safe location, I guess you could call it. So for example, as part of a coding workshop, we taught kids who had autism how to code, and these kids were like off the charts. They just picked it up so quickly and they were some of our best students. So now you can work from home, you can have a safe location, and it's therefore better also for gender equality. So at Atlassian, we have a very flexible working schedule as well. If you have children, that's fine, you can look after them whilst you're working. So it also kind of helps with gender equality in the way that it opens up opportunities for everyone to work wherever you want. Yeah, so regional, yeah, anyway, really. Yeah, I'll pass on to someone else.
Thanks, Kira. Any other response from our panelists before we wrap up?
If I may, I kind of felt that with that question, it again raises the question of public and private space, right? And women in the current era are doing pretty well in the public space, equally as in the private space. So I don't think there has to be a delineation of whether women can work better in a private space or a public space. I think it works good both the ways, even if we were out in a public space or working from home remotely. But that definitely, one incident I just wanted to share in this regard is just a while ago, we have started returning back to office once in a week. And I was talking to my colleagues saying that I feel that I was more efficient working from home because you don't have that, you'll not be spending a lot of time traveling, commuting, going from one meeting to the other, because you can just click a button and can join different meetings. And you were working more and efficiently at home than office. And suddenly this colleague told me that I think this is very gendered thing. More male feels that it's better to work from office than to work from home, whereas females are feeling that they can work more efficiently at home than in office. But I think that is also individual perspective. When we talk about equality, it shouldn't confine us in any working scenario. Now, with all the innovations, we learn different technologies and way of meeting, and these large conferences now we are doing virtually from our own homes and offices, which would not have been possible in earlier days. We could have thought of really convening a big conferences at an international level. So we have been innovating and really using all these opportunities, and all the crisis has been evolved into opportunities for all of us. And certainly, I think it will promote further equality at the individual level. But definitely, I don't want to restrict this public-private divide. Now we have all, I think, many of us women who have been in a leadership position have been able to successfully break those glass ceilings. So hopefully, we'll not again, we'll talk about this private space anymore, to be able to create opportunity for us.
Great, thank you, Latika. This has been a great discussion. We are running out of time, and to wrap up the key takeaways from our panelists, I just wanted to say that we acknowledge that the pandemic has magnified the extent and impact of inequality, but has also presented an opportunity and a perfect moment to fight for transformative action, focusing on women's leadership and on ramping up representation in all areas where decisions are made. Vizal talked about male champions that has influenced her in her life and in her career. We see progress like that happening with more women in parliament, with more women in key management positions, including STEM. With Kira, we acknowledge that we have to harness this and to make it not only a ripple effect, but to take it forward. Anna talked about social change, and that social change needs to happen with broader coalition. And bringing back to you, Latika, we talk about change, but that change needs to be at a policy level, and that needs to be taken into action, which will then bring an inclusive systemic change. So thank you all to our 4 brilliant panelists for sharing your life journey and insight in advancing gender equality. I want to also thank our audience for your support. International Women's Day is a time to reflect on progress made and to call for change. And with that spirit and determination, let us all choose to challenge. And on that note, I've been cued by our communications team that we would request everyone to put your video on so we can take a quick picture of all of you in multiple screens. We've got great response from all of our audience. And once I get a cue from our comms team that they have all the videos on and the pictures taken. Yes, looking good. What a great representation coming from all over the world, Australia, Sri Lanka to Nepal. Great representation. And of course, all over Australia. So on that note, we will bid farewell. Thank you all for joining the Scope Global International Women's Day panel event today. Enjoy the rest of the day and have a lovely weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.